Welcome back to Prepare for the Unexpected. Today we are talking with Shane Mathew about crisis management decision making. Shane, great first segment. I did just want to ask one more question. Are our decisions sometimes, in your view, impacted by crisis managers or crisis team members focusing a lot on external influences like social media, what's being said there? And then because we get so paranoid of public backlash, we end up making the wrong decisions to make them happy rather than what we really need to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an aspect to crisis management that wasn't around when I was first starting in this field. Okay, so social media is still relatively new when you compare it to the timeline of life, right? But what it can do is, like you said, influence unfairly the need to make quick decisions, to make a decision that appeases a audience that's out there that may or may not be representative of your entire customer base. And on the flip side, it can result in sometimes leaders or crisis management teams saying, you know what, we don't care about other people's opinions. And on the flip side, it can result in not taking enough thought about your customer base and pushing them aside, saying they'll always be here. I mean, Bud Light is an example, recent history, where the social media backlash resulted in a boycott. And whether you agree with the reasons behind it or not, the point is the company made some choices to ignore their fan base and resulted in a significant loss of business. So social media, for example, can really recently have shown to be the source of a lot of pain points. But then you can also look at your board of directors as being an outside influence that you may not necessarily want to have come in and bring that additional pressure as well. So you can't necessarily avoid the external pressures from your customers, nor can you think about like vendors or your board of directors or other less known stakeholders either.
I guess you really have to balance it out. Who are the stakeholders that are complaining and what are they saying and how is
So,
that impacting our brand and looking at, short-term and long-term decision making?
well, that is an excellent suggestion, Alex. I think that companies need to actually identify who are their stakeholders and determine where do they rank in terms of our interest in appeasing for certain scenarios. Okay, if it's a reputational thing versus you know, versus a product recall, there may be different stakeholders that you prioritize during those situations,
Mhm.
right? So knowing who those stakeholders are is the first step, I think, in any time you're addressing this situation.
Yeah, and I read a little while ago that Bud Light has actually been bouncing back.
Yeah, I've heard that too. But nevertheless, there was millions of dollars off the table that the company lost in that duration. So you never can be perfect, but my point is simply saying, hey, there are going to be situations where you have to take into account social media and the influence that outsiders have on your decision making. And there's times you don't. And so you have to be able to at least consider, hey, that might be a factor in our decision process.
And I just thought of something as you were talking too. So we will get back to our agenda at some point. But um, I guess with decision making too, what you're going to do, because Bud Light is a good example of this, sticking to your values has to come in there somewhere, I think.
It certainly can, and I definitely think that has to be a part of it. But sometimes your values may not necessarily jive with your customer base, right? Like meaning your individual values, right? Companies, again, we're going off topic here a little bit, but I'll just say this: that is certainly a factor. You have to consider what's important. Are you going to stick with your guns? And if so, think about that beforehand and say, yeah, no matter what, we are going to do this. What we decide as a company is important. We're going to do this. There's consequences either way,
Right.
but you have to kind of make that choice as opposed to being in the midst of a disaster. This really, to me, is a timing thing. Don't wait till the disaster to say, oh, yeah, we're going to stick with our values now.
Yeah. And I was actually referring to the corporate values, not, excuse me, not an individual,
Gotcha, gotcha.
possibly taking things in a different direction because they think a certain way.
Right,
So thank you for clarifying that for us.
certainly.
So let's talk about how does stress play a role in this?
Yeah, no, definitely it does. So there was this there was an example of one of the world's worst airline crashes. It happened in the Canary Islands in 1977. Okay. So this is a long time ago, but the primary reason for the collision was adverse conditions. There was actually a bomb threat at an airport near there. And so it rerouted traffic to this one airport in the Canary Islands called Los Rodeos Airport. So all these planes were now landing and taking off in this one small airport. And in the midst of that, a pilot misunderstood the go for takeoff and took off too early when another plane was coming down, and they crashed and collided, killing 583 people. And when you really re-examine the tapes, you see that there was a lot of confusion and stress in the pilots themselves. One of them misheard the go for launch, and that resulted in that uh, situation. And so stress has a tremendous impact on people's ability to make choices because it impairs your cognitive function. There's a lot of studies that, say, for example, you put your face in cold water, or not even your face, your hand in cold water, like 0 degree Celsius water, and then you try to make choices. You could see noticeably the ability to make choices diminishes dramatically with that stressor induced environment.
Hmm.
Okay. So, that's one confirmation that stress can make your choice making challenging. And then you start to also, when stress comes into the situation, your risk aversion starts to drive up and down, and your risk seeking behavior actually also fluctuates depending on your personality type and your body chemistry, all these things. You have changes where you wouldn't be making necessarily riskier decisions in less stressed times, right? And then you also you see reduced creativity and innovation during times of stress, right? There's less ability to think outside the box, for example, and think about solutions that are not your traditional solutions. And that's why you tend to see a lot of times in stressful situations, people tend to retreat to the more comfortable responses to a situation as opposed to, kind of coming up with a little bit more inventive strategies.
And I guess too, with the higher stress, it makes you less accepting of the viewpoints of others that might see things a little bit different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because you're more inclined to not you're less inclined to be risk averse, right?
Right.
So you're more likely to um, retreat back to your normal decision making strategies that maybe have worked for you in the past than to take an outside perspective.
Yeah, and that can cause some topics to be totally forgotten and missed, and then you're making decisions based on other information. You end up just going in a completely different direction, and you end up creating another crisis for your organization.
Right. No, absolutely.
You know, so how can we make better decisions? What can we do?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of factors that I encourage. Number one, I think you have to pick the right team. Okay, you cannot assume that decisions will be made just simply by bringing a collection of randomized individuals from your company and hope that they are going to gel together. If you think about it, the 92 Olympics, there was this phenomenon called the USA basketball team or the Dream Team.
Mhm.
Okay. And they brought these team members together. And many times people think, well, they probably just picked the top five, or 10 players from the whole NBA based on some sort of stat or something like that. Well, the reality is Chuck Daly, who was the coach, he employed a very specific set of criteria first. He named the criteria for what he wanted in the team. It was not a given that Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson or Larry Bird were going to get a membership on the team just simply because of their name. There was criteria. So skill, versatility, basketball IQ, team chemistry, leadership skills, international experience were the criteria. And so he based that decision and then he looked at players in the NBA to fill the roles. Now, it happened to be that Larry Bird and Michael Jordan had those characteristics, right? But my point is, you have to start with a criteria for your crisis management team. Okay, what is it about their decision making, their knowledge, their capability is necessary for the team that you're building? Okay, and then team size is another factor. You mentioned this earlier. If
Mhm.
you think about it, what are some of uh, the best known teams in our history? What size are there? Well, if you think about it, special operations units run about 16 members, and they're broken down into small subunits, about 4 to 5, to do their activities. You have astronaut teams from the Apollo missions were 3 to 4, and some of it is related to size of the capsule. But the point is like they're not running 50 people to manage a spaceship. They had 3, and the
Yeah.
Beatles were 4, right? So small teams work well, and there's reasons behind that. So team dynamics is important, but also team size is important because if you have 15 members on your team, making the decisions never gonna be easy to do. So
Well,
I think,
what do you have to say, because you were talking about assembling the team, that, and I'm sure I can guarantee you've been in this position, people end up on the team simply because of their title.
yeah,
If you're a vice president, the entire crisis management team are vice presidents, regardless of what they do, what they know, anything. So what are your thoughts on that? And I'm not saying that some shouldn't be there. I'm not saying that, that at all, but just your viewpoint on people being a part of that team simply because of their title, not because of their the skill that they bring
yeah.
to that.
Well, that is a common problem. I'm not going to say this is an easily surmountable issue. What I will say is that this is one of those places where I would advocate strongly for why certain people should be on your team and why others should be, brought in as necessary or involved in a different way. Like one of the ways I handle that is that I create more of a strategic executive level team, and then I make my tactical response team, right? And the tactical team is going to be made up of more people that I select that are personally, well-rounded and able to participate. And then I have my VPs and executives that again are probably really have the skill sets that you would want in some ways, but I tend to lump them into more of a strategic focused area. So that's one way to handle it. But you're right. It's not to say, especially in a smaller company, that you will have the luxury of being able to select, smaller groups for your tactical teams and strategic teams. So you really have to move into the next step. To me, is like if you're stuck with this is the group, then the next step is to improve the decision making of what you got.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's a variety of ways to do that, but that's what I would say is next.
yeah. I was at a client's, and what they did is they had a strategic team, which was all the vice presidents that would make all the key big company decisions, but delegation of authority to a tactical team to make decisions based on key responses or planning efforts or things like that that needed to be dealt with, so that vice presidents could do what they needed to do and be the external face, while the doers were then unhindered by vice presidents tapping on their shoulder. What are you doing? What are you doing? What's going on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the key here.
Yeah, because I guarantee you've been through that, and I know I have. Yeah, and it creates chaos for everybody.
Right.
So, something else you mentioned about this is, you said identify a point guard. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah, so going back to the dream team example, there in basketball terminology, if you're not familiar with the game a lot, there is a position called the point guard. And in that position, it's one of the 5 positions, a very specialized role, and they're expected to run the team's offense. They control the ball when it's coming, uh, you know, on offense when it's coming up the court, and they make sure the ball gets to the right player at the right time. And, there's a really famous point guard named Kenny Smith, and he says, you know, I've seen players that are really skilled, but few have the decision-making ability to make their entire team better. And that's really the key, is that I think the crisis manager needs to be the point guard. And if they're not capable, that they identify a person that leads the team that is that point guard. Now, point guard is not someone who makes every basket. Point guard is not someone who makes the most points necessarily on the field or on the court, excuse me. They're someone who really maximizes the team's overall capability. And that is a skill set that not many people have. So you really need to either build that within yourself or build that into your crisis team leader. And what that really involves is, just like in a point guard situation, Kenny Smith was saying, you have to watch the game, like, so meaning you watch the game itself as it's unfolding. You're watching film to see what we did in the past that was good and bad. You have to know your team's system, meaning how do we make choices here? What's the dynamics here? We have to study that system and really study other leaders. Like oftentimes we think, I'll build a plan, I'll build a group together, and we'll just throw people together into a group and everything's going to be okay. And that's not going to work out for you.
Yeah. Seen that with project teams, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is just a mess.
Right.
On that note, we've come to the end of our second segment. We're talking with Shane Mathew today about crisis management decision making, and we will be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.